just don't break the rules.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to your Tuesday informational meeting. It's Tuesday, August 28th. Call this meeting to order. We'll start off with open discussion. Any open discussion amongst the council? Seeing no open discussion, we'll move straight into our presentations. Our first presentation today is Lincoln Minnehaha County Pre-Disaster Hazardous Mitigation Plan Update. I think you win the award for longest title too. Welcome, Regan, today. Thank you.
Thank you. Regan Smith, the Emergency Management. I also have Harold Timmerman with Lincoln County, Linda Young with Minnehaha County Emergency Management, and then Andy Berg with Public Works. Again, thanks for allowing us the opportunity to brief the council on the update of the Minnehaha County, Lincoln County multi-jurisdiction pre-disaster mitigation plan. That is long. You might ask, what exactly is that plan? The mitigation plan basically identifies major hazards, impacts of those hazards, potential projects that can mitigate those damages from the threat. It contains a community profile, hazard analysis, disaster history, and then some of those strategies that we can take care of those. This is an update to the 2012 plan. Just like to let you know, it's not a disaster response plan. The city does have an emergency operations plan that sets that framework for our disaster response and recovery actions. So why do we have this or need it? It is an eligibility requirement to apply for federal disaster mitigation grants. And responsible communities, they go through this process, identify what their hazards are, and then take action to lessen the effects on public infrastructure, business community, and to the general public. So there was the Southeast Council of Government facilitated meetings with the counties and all the communities within Minnehaha and Lincoln County, met several times, 25 political subdivisions, assisted the county in the development of the plan, and again, that's cities, townships, rural electrics, water districts, and conservation districts. With the city, emergency management, public works, and city planning participated in the process. The federal emergency management agencies reviewed and approved the plan, as has Minnehaha and Lincoln County. Once the city of Sioux Falls and the other subdivisions approve the plan, it will be finalized by FEMA, and then all the entities within those counties will be eligible to apply for mitigation projects. With that, pretty straightforward. I'd entertain any questions.
Thank you, Regan. Any questions from the council on this presentation? Councilor Neitzer.
Just curious, where does Andy fit in this? Is that for the flood, for the water? Is that where he comes in?
Right, for storm drainage, flood control, things like that. We take a look at our whole system, and if there are any eligible projects, we try to identify those and determine if they'd meet the cost benefit for the grant process if their funds become available.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Our next item today is on the Emerald Ash Borer City Response Update. Welcome, Kelby. I know we have you listed for 5 minutes, but we had a little typo and we anticipate giving you longer than 5 minutes for that.
Thank you. Yes, it might take a little bit longer than 5 minutes. Good afternoon, City Council. Kelby Maris with Parks and Recreation. Happy to be here today to provide you an update on our Emerald Ash Borer response. I would like to start with thanking some people who have been instrumental in getting us to this point. People from Public Works, the City Attorney's Office, Finance, the City Health Department, Neighborhood Services, Fire Department, GIS, the Mayor's Office, and of course Parks and Recreation. The opening slide here has a picture from St. Paul, Minnesota, and really want to start with this as to let everybody know that this is a situation that we would definitely like to avoid. We do not have many streets within Sioux Falls that are completely lined with ash trees like this, but we also do not want to take an approach where there's clear cutting like this and leaving a lot of stumps and something like this in its wake. So we definitely do not want our streets to look like this, and our proposed response plan, we believe, will keep us from this situation. As a reminder, we visited last spring about the death curve as the emerald ash borer is taken in other communities, how the beetle population explodes, and then the percentage of tree mortality follows that. Essentially, here in Sioux Falls, we're in about year 2 of the infestation, 85,000 ash trees. Really, the communities that have preceded us have found in between year 7 and 8 that they really fall behind, and that's when the death curve really spikes and then overwhelms their resources. As another reminder, the number of ash trees that we do have in Sioux Falls, there's a little more than 22,000 on the city streets. Street trees, those would be the trees in the right-of-way. There's about 16,500 public trees and in parks, but this also includes wooded areas such as Tut Hill Park and the riparian areas along the river. And then we estimate another 45,000 trees that are private trees in the community for a total of about 85,000 ash trees, or about 26% of the total canopy. So the action plan, which actually will kick off next week, week following Labor Day, or the days just following Labor Day. So the remainder of 2018 and all of 2019, we plan to contract the removal of 2,200 street trees in 2019, and in the balance of 2018 and 19, remove more than 500 public trees to be removed by city crews, and then grind all of those stumps by city crews. Also, we want to complete an inventory, which would be done by contractors, a street tree inventory, and this would be a 2019 project as well. The picture on this slide, the blue highlighted areas are trees that have been inventoried within the park system, and the green spots up there are trees that have been inventoried by the master gardeners. This is work that they kicked off in July and have gotten to this point. It's a massive undertaking, and we can't thank them enough for what they've done for us so far. And of course, just a reminder, they are inventorying every street tree, not just ash trees. So those are all trees there that are in the right-of-way. But in order to get the inventory complete in a timely manner by the end of next year, we do believe that we're going to have to contract that effort. I had also mentioned in a previous slide that we estimated about 40% of the street trees were ash trees, and that's the information that we're finding through the efforts of the master gardeners that they have inventoried, and that actually about 40% of those street trees are ash trees. So our street tree removal plan would look something like this. The city, through contractors, would come in and remove the tree and all associated debris. The city would then grind the stump and haul away the excess grindings that are left after stump removal. And this all would be done at no cost to the abutting property owner. The property owner, following the removing of the tree and the grinding of the stump, would be responsible to restore the turf and to replant any tree if they so desire. The replanting of those trees, though, would need to follow the street tree guide and the rules that are currently in ordinance, and would also be subject to some ordinance changes, which we will get to a little bit later. The street tree removal plan would be to remove approximately 33% or a third of the ash trees in this area. Of course, when we get into city blocks, saying we're only going to remove 33% might not be attainable. If we get into a city block that's only got one ash tree in it, well, if we remove that one tree, we've taken 100% of them. So, but in that whole general area, we're looking to remove approximately 33%. And that area targeted is there on the picture on this slide as well. There's about 7,000 ash trees in that area, so 33% would, or the 2,200 we're talking about, would be less than that 33%. So the process would look something like this. We would send a postcard to all the property owners within this removal area that would detail the process that we are going to take going forward. We would then place a door hanger on the property of any property in which we mark a tree for removal, and we would mark the tree for removal with a blue 9. That 9 represents 2019 and also distinguishes it from our other street tree removal program. We would then also follow up that door hanger with a letter to the property owner with the tree again that's been marked with that blue 9, and we want to verify the treatment status of that tree at that time. One, we want to make sure that the tree hasn't been treated in 2018, and for whatever reason we haven't been given that information. Or two, if they plan to treat that tree in 2019, we want to make sure of that as well so it can be removed from the removal list and that those treatments can then go forward. In 2019, it will be the contractor's responsibility then to communicate with the impacted property owners for these removals and detailing their process. One, to make sure that when the contractor gets it, there's no cars planted on the streets, underneath the tree that needs to come down. And we also want to make sure that everybody is aware that these trees lighters are likely to go out in October of this year. But this process of removing 2,200 trees is going to take a significant amount of time. So the timeline between actually getting a letter and having your tree removed could be more than 12 months if the trees are not coming down until December of 2019. So this can and definitely will be a long process. Our plan for public tree removals. These would be the trees on public property and in city parks. We are targeting poor quality trees. We've targeted trees in 33 of the parks starting after Labor Day, which would be next week. There are some notable parks that we are targeting: Falls, McKinnon, Terrace, Dunham, Frank Olson, Keene, Sherman, and Yankton Trail Park. These are notable because each of these parks has 95 or more ash trees. So we can't just go into that park and take down all the ash trees all at once in any one given year and not go back to it. These are parks that are actually going to be touched throughout the response. Because again, as a way to slow the infestation, we want to leave food for the insects. So in areas where we've got a large concentration of ash trees, if we can leave some ash trees for the insects to attack, will actually slow the infestation down. The other parks that are listed here on this slide have 10 or fewer ash trees within the park. So once we get into that park, it makes sense for efficiency's sake to just go ahead and take all of those trees or all those ash trees that are in the park. There will be trees left within the park, just no ash trees at that time. So that would eliminate the ash trees from at least 24 of our city parks. This response will be completed by crews from Parks and Recreation, the Street Department, who will help out in hauling, and fire rescue crews, wildland fire crews that need training opportunities for felling and cutting trees would all participate in public tree removals. Another reminder, I know you've seen this slide before, but the gray line on the slide indicates the number of trees that or indicates the death curve, and the yellow line indicates our proposed pace of removal. We anticipate that our pace of removal will flatten out this death curve and that we won't actually fall behind as this slide indicates. But then again, as we get deeper into this and each year, we will definitely learn more. We definitely do want to touch on private tree removals and encourage private property owners to begin planning for the removal of their ash trees. These are trees that will not be taken down by the city. These are trees that will be the responsibility of the property owner, and they need to anticipate and plan for the cost of these removals. Some of the removals of these trees, just because of their size and because of their location and they're accessible to arborists, can cost over $1,000 to remove. So definitely planning on their part is going to be important. We want to avoid standing dead ash trees because, as we've talked before, ash trees, once they're dead, become brittle and fail unpredictably. And we definitely want to avoid that public safety concern. But I can tell you that in visiting with some of our licensed arborists, there is a lot of interest in the community for private tree removals to begin this fall. So with all these tree removals, of course, wood waste disposal, it comes to the forefront of our mind. What are we going to do with all of this wood waste? There are 3 approved areas for wood waste drop-off currently. Of course, the landfill, and then 2 locations for Mueller Pallet. One which is located south of town on Louise Avenue. The other one is located west of town, actually west of Family Park, just west of the Ellis Road and north of 12th Street. Mentioned some proposed ordinance changes earlier, and we will be bringing these before you for your consideration next month. But we're proposing 2 new sections be added to the ordinance. The first one would be to prohibit the planting of any new ash tree. This probably goes without saying, but we definitely want to make sure that we don't make this problem any worse. And just as recently as this spring, there was a retailer in town that was actually selling ash trees. So we want to make sure that we get this in our ordinances so that we can make sure that that doesn't happen. The next ordinance that would be new would be to prohibit the movement of raw ash wood between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Would need a permit to do that. But this excludes finished wood products such as heat-treated firewood, furniture, baseball bats. Of course, we don't want to prohibit anybody from taking a baseball bat into the park and using it, but do want to make sure that we're prohibiting the raw ash wood movement between those months. Again, that's when the beetle is active and then can be transported by humans, and we want the beetle to move on its own. We don't want to do it any favors. A couple of ordinance additions that we'd be proposing. One is to actually bring back a planting in the public right-of-way permit. It would require the property owner to get a permit before they plant a tree in the right-of-way. This would provide for us an opportunity to visit with the property owners and make sure that, one, that they're planting a tree in an appropriate location, that they're following the rules of the ordinance, and 2, that their planting helps with our forestry diversification. Want to make sure the best we can that we don't, or that we diversify our urban forest so that we don't repeat history and end up with too many of the same type of tree again. We'd also visited earlier about the street tree inventory. This planting permit then would also provides us with that opportunity to go out and inventory any new tree that goes into the right-of-way, because obviously we will be maintaining that inventory. Any tree that gets removed will come off of the inventory, and now any tree that gets planted would go back on that inventory. Our last proposed ordinance change is an increase to the licensed arborist fee. Currently, the application fee to become a licensed arborist is $35. Our proposal is to make that $150. The annual renewal fee for a licensed arborist is currently $17.50, and we're proposing that annual fee be increased to $100. For comparison's sakes, with some other contractors in town and within our ordinances, electricians and plumbers and mechanical contractors, this is more in line with the license fee that they pay on a yearly basis. Also, the cost to verify chemical applications for anybody that's done treating of trees. The cost for that verification through testing and visiting with Dr. John Ball from SDSU, those costs range between $80 and $100 per tree. We've got more than 40 licensed arborists that are out there treating trees, so any one of those, the payment for any one of those verification tests could be offset by their arborist license fee. Admittedly, the fee is higher than what we have found in looking around the region. We found one pretty similar, but it was in Bismarck. I would also want to remind everybody that at this point, Sioux Falls is the only city in South Dakota that has the emerald ash borer. All of this, of course, is going to mean a new reality for our urban forest. Our urban forest is definitely going to get younger as trees are removed and new trees are planted. Sounds are going to be different this fall. There's going to be the sounds of chainsaws and chippers and trucks hauling wood waste. These removals, though, will create space for new plantings. If somebody has been wanting to plant a certain tree and there was another one in its way or would have overshadowed it, now would create that opportunity to plant that tree. Also creates an opportunity for us to make sure that trees, again, are planted in appropriate locations and that we diversify our urban forest. Communication is going to be paramount throughout our response plan. We have done a lot of communications to this point and have put together a communications plan. To this point, we have utilized news releases, a utility bill insert, which you may have seen in your August utility bill, and planning for another one here in September. The postcards that I have mentioned before, leveraging the Everbridge notification system once it becomes active later this fall. Letters to impacted property owners who are going to have trees removed. Continuous updates in our Parks and Recreation e-newsletter. Social media posts, website updates, brochures, communications with other key stakeholders like our licensed arborists, garden centers, retailers, realtors, developers, neighborhood and homeowner associations, and other community partners as well. So in conclusion, we believe we've put together a solid plan for managing the infestation to help smooth out the impact, and we'll adjust the strategy, of course, as we learn more each year. Definitely want to start early, and we have started early to get to the point where we have 3 months after discovery of the infestation in Sioux Falls. I think speaks a lot to the work that has been put together so far. We definitely need to plan for replanting efforts, and that plan is underway. We need to stick with our plan and not get complacent, because at this point, people have not really noticed anything as far as impacts to emerald ash borer. And as soon as trees begin to be removed, those impacts are actually going to finally become visible. We also want to avoid the 5-year, nobody told us this would happen. We're here to tell you this is what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, how other communities have seen the same thing happen to them, and what we're in for. Of course, definitely going to continue to communicate throughout the response efforts year over year, and we definitely don't want to repeat history. And one way we can do that is definitely through diversification of our tree population. And diversification is not only with species diversification, but with age diversification. So at 33% or not taking and clear cutting trees definitely helps with that. So with that, we would be happy to answer any question that you may have.
Thank you, Kelby. Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. Kelby, you went through 3 different classifications of trees, street tree removal, public tree removal, and private tree removal, just so that we're all on the same page. Street tree, you're referring to anything in the right-of-way.
Correct.
And in this case, it could be whether it's publicly owned property or privately owned property. It would all depend upon, if it's privately, they have to be within a designated area for the time being anyway, for
Correct.
your 2018-19 plan. And the differentiation between a private tree would be anything that's on private property outside of the right-of-way. So in somebody's backyard or situated somewhere else in the front yard, but not in the right-of-way.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And then skipping over the proposed ordinance changes, you were talking about changing the fee to $150 in the annual license to from $17.50 to $100. That $150 fee, does that include the license fee that first time?
Yes, it does.
So it's the application and the licensing.
Yes.
And then after that, it would be $100. Seems reasonable, and especially considering the cost for removing these trees. I mean, an arborist is going to make that back many times over, probably on the first job. The Other question then regarding the street tree removal plan and the marking of the trees with the large blue number 9, which signals the tree would be removed in 2019. What can be done to identify trees that have already been treated by the property owner before this large blue, somewhat permanent number 9 is going to be sprayed on their tree?
Right. Well, we have requested treatment information from our licensed arborists so that we know which trees have been treated, especially the ones in the right-of-way. Those trees are required to be tagged as well, so there'll be a silver tag, excuse me, on that tree. So 1, we'll see the tag. 2, we'll have the addresses of those properties where it did have trees that were treated. The only ones that we won't know about before marking are any of these trees that have been treated by the property owner. I do know that some property owners have purchased the equipment and the chemical to actually inject their own tree. So that's going to be the only piece of information we don't have. But through our licensed arborist, we should be able to avoid that. And also, that's the reason in the letter we're asking about the treatment, because we definitely want to make sure that if the tree has been treated, that it's not on the removal list.
Absolutely. Yeah, you would hate to see your investment go. Although the payback, I guess for me, if I were the homeowner, even if I had treated it and it was offered by the city to take it out at city expense and not my expense, I might say go ahead and do it, even if I have a $200 or $300 investment in that first year, because I know that's going to be an ongoing investment on my part, at least every other year, from
Correct.
what I understand it. But again, anything you can do to help identify those trees that have been treated by the homeowner too, because I do know a number of homeowners who have done their own treatment definitely before removal, but even before spraying on that large blue number 9.
Right, and hopefully that postcard will get to them too, and they can make contact with us, and even before we go out to do the marking.
And I would agree that this is a solid plan. And it looks like it's a plan that enables you to maybe keep ahead of the curve on this. So, good job. Thank you.
Councilor Brecky.
Yeah, just a couple questions about the licensure. What are the requirements to have an arborist license? Can you just tell me generally?
Generally, either you have to be a certified arborist, or you have to pass a test that we have for, excuse me, for the licensed arborist. We also require insurance of that company as well, and that's really about it at that point. And the license is a business license. It's not for every, it does cover every employee, so not every employee of that company has to be a certified arborist. So
what does it take to become a certified arborist? Is that like a college degree, or is that like a trade?
there's training and, again, a test. To be certified in the state of South Dakota, there is a test through the State Arborist Association. There's also a test through the International Society of Arboriculture, and to become an ISA certified arborist.
Okay. And I'm hearing that a lot of arborists are coming into the community, you know, kind of following the ash borer through the country. Is there anything that you can, I guess, say to the public that can kind of tune them into how they know that they've got a qualified arborist working for them? I mean, I think there's been, I'm hearing some concerns about variations in pricing. There's some dramatic variations in pricing. So what I've been telling my friends and the people that are asking me is, stay with your local guys. And I don't know if that's necessarily fair, because I'm sure some of the outsiders that are coming in are probably fine, but I'm concerned about that. I'm wondering if you are concerned at all about that.
Definitely concerned. Want to make sure that we're doing everything we can for consumer protections. It's one of the main reasons for the license, so that it's not just anybody who can do tree work. But if there is some pricing concerns, my advice would be is to get bids. I know that there's a lot of work out there, and some companies are resisting coming out to give quotes for removals and other things, but at the same time, I would definitely get bids on doing some of this work, especially as expensive as it can be.
So I think some of the concern is that, you know, if they pump in a diluted amount of the chemical or don't treat it properly, they'll be long gone. before the property owner knows that they've been scammed. So I would just tell you, I'm hearing some of that. I'm hearing some concern that some people have heard that in other parts of the country that some of that was happening. So I just would make you aware of that. Then the other question I have is just what are the kinds of trees that are kind of the priority ones, the ones that you'd like to see in the boulevards? I mean, I know when they were encouraging the ash trees, back when we had just gone through the Dutch elm disease, the city was encouraging ash trees because it had a deep root, a deep tap root. It grew like a weed, and it required really low maintenance. So it was like the ash tree was the queen of trees. And now it's so sad to see this happen to us again. But I know that a lot of the other trees that are beautiful tend to have those shallow root systems and bump up the sidewalk. So are there some, can you give me just a laundry list, just a short list of what are the kinds of ones you'd like to see in the boulevards?
Well, we do have an approved street tree list, so any tree on that list would be one that we would recommend. But at the same time, I would recommend that if you're going to plant a tree in the right-of-way, that you look around your neighborhood, look at your neighbor's trees, and plant something different. And with all of our trees, I mean, yeah, there are trees that are on the street tree list that, may have a shallower root system and may pop a sidewalk, but I mean, in the grand scheme of things, a few panels of sidewalk, can be worth the price for a beautiful street tree.
Thank you.
Kelby, can you do me a favor and just separate your mics a little bit? I just got a message that, thank you. A little bit more maybe, I think. Tom, is that all right? Okay, thank you. I just got a message to ask you to do that because there's feedback or something with it. Councilor Neitzer, then Councilor Starr.
Thank you. So let's talk about the spot checks that you were talking about. Just to remind us, who is going to be doing those to verify that the right amount of chemical is going in? Who's doing that verification, and is it a random sampling or every tree? And how long from, let's say, the time that you found out a treatment has been done? Just kind of talk us through that.
So the verification test, the commitment has been made by Dr. Ball and the state to do those tests. Of course, it'll require some laboratory testing, and they've got the expertise to do that. They can find the chemical in the canopy of the tree even the next year after the injection's been done. Actually, it can't be done close to the injection time because the tree needs time to actually take up all of that chemical and get it up throughout the canopy.
Okay, and who currently would be paying for that testing? Is that just out of our operational budget, or?
Well, right now, none of that testing, as far as I know, has been done. We have visited with Dr. Ball about that and about testing, and especially making sure that we're testing for maybe at least one of the people who are out there that are doing the injections. He hasn't necessarily asked us for a financial commitment at this point, but I would guess that there might be one, and then yes, that would come from our operations budget.
Okay, I mean, it would depend how much we're talking. I mean, maybe it would make sense for it to be some sort of a recovery, whether it be the contractor or the user or something, but it depends whether we're talking a small amount or we're talking enormous amounts of money. So just going forward to think about, what are the teeth? Let's say that they tested and it was diluted. Now what do? Do we have a way to find somebody, or?
We have the option of pulling the arborist license, so they would no longer be able to work in Sioux Falls. State also has some teeth in their commercial applicator's license as well, so it's kind of twofold.
So they would be essentially lose their ability to do business. That's kind of the...
Potentially, yes. It's a process that I know Dr. Ball has worked through in the mountain pine beetle days.
Okay, I'll ask one more and then I'll defer to do my rest. You mentioned the planting permit, or putting a planting permit in place. Mm-hmm. Would there be a cost associated with that permit?
No, sir. That permit, just like our removal permit, would be free.
Okay, just an opportunity to get the education and to get that inventory.
Right, and to make sure that we're adhering to the ordinance and planting trees in appropriate locations.
Okay, all right. I'll defer for now.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Maris, I want to make sure I heard Dr. Ball correctly when he was here the last time. One of the statements he made, and if I want to make sure I interpreted it right, is that even if you treat ash trees 10 years from now, they're going to be done. The likelihood of your ash tree being able to extend past the next 10 years, even with treatment, is going to be very limited, if not. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, the emerald ash borer is now part of our ecosystem, so it's never going away. So these treatments can't stop. After 10 years, what he was saying is likely you can extend the time in between your treatments. But again, I mean, if for whatever reason, if the tree doesn't take up the treatment, if it gets too large and gets, infested, then the tree is going to die as well. So it's an ongoing process. If you decide to treat a tree, throughout the natural life of that tree, you're going to have to continuously treat.
And the likelihood that fatigue comes at some point, that it's a balance of whether it's in the right place and what the amount is to continue to treat. And so the overall likelihood, maybe closer to 20 years, there probably won't be any ash trees. I mean, not that you can predict, but trying to get to that point that, where is that last ash tree going to be? And the likelihood after that 10 years, even in our community, they're going to be very few and far between.
Right. Yeah, I would say that in 10 years they're going to be few and far between. But I mean, at the same time, it kind of all depends on how our efforts slow the infestation. There are communities in the Twin Cities area that don't have a confirmed infestation yet because of the efforts of the other communities. So we likely could space this out. It could be more 15 years where we still have some ash trees around. But again, the emerald ash borer is not going anywhere. It's going to stay, and its population is only going to explode. So especially as the larger trees get infested, the more beetles that emerge from those trees every year.
The other thing to take just a little different approach to this too is that I think Councilor Kiley had the right idea that yes, we have a very thought out plan for removal and infestation and treating and doing that. I want to continue to harp on making sure that we're planting trees now and get ahead of it, because one of the things that makes Sioux Falls such a great place to live is when you drive through our 229 corridor and the trees that are there, the tree-lined streets that we do have, and to not leave the stumps behind, and we've got a good plan for that. But before the turf's fixed, that we have a plan to make sure that we're planting additional trees and making sure that we're funding that just as aggressively as we are with the removal of trees. So want to make sure that we encourage, as part of your plan, that we've got the lists of where we're cutting trees and where we're removing the ash trees and leaving behind. I want to see another column that says this is where we're replacing trees at the same time, to encourage that part and to move forward with that. So best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. So
absolutely.
I get to use the cliche today, so that's my role. So thank you.
Well, and to follow up on the John Ball thing, I think I heard him say that the reason these treatments fail is because people just get fatigued or they move away. They kind of give up. So it sounded like the longevity of it could go on for quite a while. Did you hear him say that?
Yes, that's true.
I had asked Don Kearney a few questions, and I just wanted to touch on these. And I had said, will the city be treating ash trees in the boulevard? Now, Don, you replied not in 2018 or 2019. Can I read into that would be not in 2020 or 2021 or ever? Are we ever going to be treating the ash trees on the boulevard?
It is a management strategy. At this point, it's not part of our response plan. As we'd mentioned before, we've got so many ash trees. We've got too many ash trees in Sioux Falls anyway. So our first approach was to thin the herd, so to speak.
So 2020, you may be treating some of the ash trees? Because right now it's sounding to me like you get the 9 on the tree. And by the way, does that blue stuff wash off?
It doesn't wash off, but it can be covered up.
Okay, just in case, because I agree with Councilor Kiley that could be a problem with homeowners that are already taking that into their own hands. I'm going to go back to John Doe here because he seems to be the very popular citizen within my colleagues' mind here. John Doe. So John Doe treats his tree in 2018 on the boulevard. Everything's meshed out correctly. So there's a chance then that in 2020, the city is going to step up and do the next treatment? Because I mean, if they're ever going to treat it, I would think they're going to have to, because right now, as it is, the resident treats it, right?
Correct.
You step up and treat your tree, or it's going to get cut down, right? It's going to get the 9 on it. Okay, so actually then, so we can say the city is, I can tell the citizens the city will never be treating that tree on the boulevard. Don's kind of saying I'm accurate. I just want, people want to know how this is going to play out for them.
Yeah, I think Kelby's comments are correct, is that we have an overpopulation of ash trees in our street trees in our public parks. And we're trying to get that ash tree population down to 5%. I think where we identified potential treatments of trees are where we have a specimen tree or we have a key location where we have a tree that happens to shade a particular area where we need it. But as a general rule, I think there's two strategies that have been taking place up in the cities. St. Paul went the treatment plan, Minneapolis went on the removal plan. St. Paul is really struggling to keep up. That's the picture you saw on the front page because they got behind in being able to keep up with their removal plan. And so Minneapolis, I think, is in pretty good shape. And so the other factor is cost. If the city begins treating trees, and you calculate that by the number of trees that we have to treat, it gets really expensive really fast. And so our definite plan is much more on the removal. We do not plan to treat street trees. But again, if there is a tree by a particular park that happens to shade an area that we really find value, or it's in a strategic location that we don't want to remove it, then I do think we can certainly treat in those locations. But I think it's definitely the exception to the rule.
Well, because that's where you could run into a problem. If you've got John Doe is treating his tree, and then his neighbor Mary Jones says, "Well, the city treated my tree," that will cause a problem with people.
Yeah, we definitely do not plan to do that.
Okay, then the project, my least favorite part of our city government, Project Trim. We talked about that, and I said, is Project Trim suspended this year? And you have said, we've said this before, the summer, it has been suspended from Memorial Day to Labor Day. So the question here is, after Labor Day, which is just around the corner, isn't it? Yeah, so are you going to start sending Project Trim letters out now, next week?
In the coming weeks, we plan to do our final Project Trim survey for 2018.
Okay, so if somebody has an ash tree at that time, then they will go out and cut it off and just haul it out, or?
Correct.
I would make a motion that we just suspend it for the rest of the year, in fairness to everybody, as we're reevaluating that whole program. But, okay, anyway, that's the question there. Then, moving on,
Just for the record, I want to be clear that we don't make motions during our meeting.
I
It's a
get that.
suggestion.
That was
sure.
just a pattern of speech.
I agree, and I just want to make sure that we didn't get down.
And it didn't have a second anyway, so.
It would have died anyways.
You know, it wasn't
record.
going anywhere. It wasn't
you.
getting out of the water at this time. Okay, so the second thing is, how many arborists do we have in Sioux Falls right now?
The exact number I don't have off the top of my hand. We do have an approved arborist list on our website, but I believe it's over 40.
Has that expanded? Because I know when I've gotten that Project Trim letter, there's always those arborists, and which, by the way, when Project Trim hits a neighborhood, those arborists are floating around like bees on honey. It's really a money-making endeavor for a lot of these people. So would you say that those were 40 people? Has that list increased since the ash borer?
The list has increased, and we've also added some companies who have been in Sioux Falls who have added the arborist license piece to their quiver, so to speak, is because they do the chemical treatments, but they don't do removals or trimming.
And I'm good. I've taken slides of your things. I'm going to put this on Facebook just to help people know, because it's great information, and they're not always watching here at 4 o'clock informational time. But the last thing, I'm going to be asking Jim David to do a little survey for us, because I would like to know, and this is just kind of all tied together, but the project trim aspect, we're talking about how much other communities are charging to be licensed to be arborists, and we always compare ourselves with other communities. So I'm going to be doing a survey across the southeastern, well, actually the whole eastern part of our state, to see how do these communities handle trimming and caring for the trees on the boulevard. Right now, if somebody's tree is damaged and needs to be removed on the boulevard, the city does do that, doesn't it?
Storm damage, yes, we do.
We take care of it, yes. So just to find out how, because I think Brookings, as I've stated before, Brookings and Aberdeen and Fargo, that's North Dakota, but a lot of these communities are taking, Brandon even, they take care of their own trees. They do that. They reallocate money in a department, maybe taking it from some place that's not quite as utilized, putting that energy towards helping to trim those trees for the citizens. Maybe utilizing some penitentiary workforce help, but finding ways to creatively make this thing better for our citizens, because I know we can do that. So that's just a statement, not a motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sale.
Yes, first I'd like to commend you for your plan. I believe from what I see here and the people involved, it'll be well executed and get ahead. Secondly, I do appreciate that you're continuing with Project Trim. And the reason that I don't want to see you drop all your other duties just because we have Emerald Ash Borer. And I would encourage you to continue with that. How it's funded, hopefully Teresa can come up with the money to do that, and we'd add a whole bunch more park board or park employees to take care of that. My question, I'm going to talk about Councilor Staley's friend, Mr. Doe. If he has his private tree in his front yard and it is diseased and it poses a hazard to the public, where does our enforcement come to get Mr. Doe to take his tree down?
Sure. We do a dead and diseased tree survey every year in July, where we survey the entire city looking for dead and diseased trees, not just on the right-of-way, but private trees as well. Private trees go through a process that we've worked out with the city attorney's office, a series of letters giving them a series of deadlines to have the tree removed, then an order to remove, and then if it's still not removed, we then go and contract its removal. And it's typically the next year. That tree will come down by contract. And sometimes, actually earlier this month, you saw a few of those on the special assessments where the city contracted the removal of the tree and it was assessed to the property for those property owners that didn't pay the invoice.
Thank you. Let's assume Mr. Doe is on a fixed income and the cost to remove this very large tree runs into thousands of dollars. Are you aware of any city program that would help subsidize the cost of the removal of that tree?
I am not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the plan and the presentation. Question, I think Councilor Brecky and Councilor Staley touched on it too. I'm just curious, has your department any heads up been brought up at this point as far as any fly-by-night industries that have been coming through town, kind of taking advantage of, with opportunities come some opportunists, obviously, and I'm just curious if any of that's raising its...
No, we haven't seen any of that just yet. We do have a bit of experience of that from the ice storm, but we haven't seen it with the Emerald Ash Borer at this point. Any of the concerns that have been brought up have been able to have been dealt with, and those happen every year and have. So, we just kind of referee the disagreement.
When you say you can relate regarding to the ice storms, did you run into some of that back then? And if you did find people who maybe weren't getting licensed or doing things they weren't supposed to, or what exactly? How do you handle that if you come across it?
Yeah, we make contact with people that aren't licensed to make sure that they become licensed and let them know that they can't work in our city without being a licensed arborist. And it's at that point that it's for them to decide whether or not they're gonna go through the process and be licensed, or if they're gonna leave and go back home to wherever they call home.
Kind of a slap on the wrist type thing, no heavy penalty, or is there if you're a repeat offender maybe, or?
Repeat offenders can be cited for operating without a license. Really, our approach is more of a, hey, Big Brother's here and we are watching and you will do this right.
Okay, that makes sense. What type of efforts are going to be made to communicate with our landfill customers about transporting ash as this moves along, probably particularly between Memorial and Labor Day? And
yep, we of course are working closely with Public Works on that, and they of course do have regular communication with their haulers, and we'll provide it to the haulers that way for one. But also we plan other public outreach to make sure that that people are aware we don't want people transporting infested wood through Sioux Falls out to the landfill. Really kind of the whole brainstorming idea behind that, and making sure that we lock down that transport as best we can.
very good, thank you.
Thank you. I will add to your question, Councilor Selberg, that there is a penalty if they're not licensed with the state of South Dakota, that they'll kind of unleash the hammer as well, and operating a business in South Dakota without a sales tax license is a felony. So they have that hanging over their head as well, which these fly-by-night companies sometimes do that. Councilor Neitzer.
So in some of these parks where we're talking about where we have hundreds of trees, one of my favorite portions of the bike trail is from about Yankton Trail Park going down to Cherry Rock. Are there a lot along the river and along the bike trail? Because one of my favorite parts is that canopy. Because of is that going to look substantially different in the next handful of years? Well,
we haven't inventoried those trees, but through my experiences, yes, that's gonna look a lot different. There are a lot of native ash trees, especially along the river and through the bike trail system.
Okay, so I'm going to just kind of repeat what Councilor Starr said. To the extent that it makes sense, it sure would be nice as one is coming out that something else is going in the parks. So just try to get that canopy growing again. So just out of curiosity, something that I haven't really understood as I've listened to Dr. Ball and all of these discussions. So once the tree population has, let's say, mostly gone away, what happens to the bugs? Can they survive without, are they all going to die at some point, or?
Well, not all of them. Like I said, they're part of our ecosystem and they're going to stay here. The population, of course, will definitely decrease as the number of ash trees decrease. I mean, if there's limited hosts, there's going to be limited predators.
But so even if you get your tree beyond, let's say, 20 years, there's always still the risk that it could get infested. You'll never be done, as it were.
Right. Okay. Even stories that Dwayne has told about his time going out to the Detroit area where it started, remembers walking out of his hotel room to look at the devastation throughout town, and there was an ash tree sapling in the parking lot. So ash tree saplings will still continue to come up, and then when they get to a certain size, emerald ash borer attacks it as well. So there's always going to be a little bit of food and a little bit of insect, but after the population explodes and the number of trees, mortality increases, then those numbers decline.
Okay, and then the last thing, and thank you, was for as far as the fee increases, I don't like fee increases, but you can get me on board if you can show me that there's essentially a nexus. For example, that you can show me that the cost for the staff to do X amount of work, for example, if it costs 2 hours for our permit tech to do whatever, and then you're going to recover that cost. So is there something of which your numbers, the numbers you presented, rather than just looking at, well, this is what another community charges, that you can show some sort of a, whatever it may be, that there's a nexus where the numbers will make sense, that we're recovering the costs that it's costing us as a city?
Okay.
So if anything you can show, if you don't have that today,
yep, no.
that would be helpful. So, because obviously if it takes 4 hours staff time to do processing of something, then it makes total sense. But if we're just charging $100 just to pick a number, then that's a little harder to justify. So,
Okay.
look forward to that.
Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. I guess before I get into my questions, I personally, and this relates to what Councilor Neitzer was just stating, I do have an ash tree in the right-of-way in front of my home, and even though I do like it, I've made the decision it's going to go as nature takes its course, because these little bugs are going to have a way of evolving and adapting to their new environment, and there's no guarantee that if I treat my ash tree that it's not going to get knocked down by the next ice storm either. So Murphy's Law applies. But anyway, going back to the licensed arborists, a few years ago I led an effort to beef up the peddlers ordinance in the city of Sioux Falls, requiring that they're all licensed by the city and they all have visible ID on them as they approach homeowners. And you may have mentioned this already, but even if you have, it's worth repeating. Are you going to have similar requirements that, because I can see once there's a big 9 on a tree that you're going to have solicitors knocking on the door or leaving cards. Are you going to have a similar requirement that they have ID, that they can produce their license, and that they're listed on a website that our city website, so citizens can follow up to indeed verify that it's not just a license or an ID that they produced on their own?
At this point, we've relied on our licensed arborist list that's on our website. Right? We also send it to people who, when they ask for a list of licensed arborists, we will either email or snail mail them a list. We also, the licensed arborists in town have their license number on their vehicles, but we can definitely investigate ensuring that when they approach, especially cold calling to property owners, that there's a way for them to be identified as a licensed arborist.
I guess I would think that if they're going to start going door to door, then they have now become a peddler in addition to being an arborist and would have to abide by the peddler's ordinance. So I think that's worth looking into anyway.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Councilor Staley.
I echo that. I think that's a very important thing for them to have to do, be able to identify them, have some kind of a badge. And then going back to what Councilor Starr was talking about with replanting these trees, when a homeowner decides to buy that tree, it can be any size. Is that correct?
Yes.
To put something, so as long as they get the right variety.
Right. Yeah, we would encourage them to be 1.5 to 2 inch minimum before they're planted.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I just have one question, and in regards to the, I know you're not supposed to transport between the Memorial Day, Labor Day. What happens if Mother Nature decides to hack one down? What do? Where do they need to contact the city? Because you don't want it just sitting on the side of the road or,
Right. There, well, like everything, there are some exceptions to the rule. We recently had some storm damage on the east side of Sioux Falls. And yeah, ash trees went down, and that we have to deal with that because it is a public safety issue. So that debris then is cleaned up and hauled to a disposal site, even though it's in between Memorial Day and Labor Day. But it's as you mentioned, it's one of those things that has to happen for the safety of our community, and those things will continue.
just so they're not penalized for that, but it has to be a rare circumstance of which that takes place versus I'm just going to do it because I have the weekend off type thing. So,
Right.
Okay. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry, Councilor Staley.
Up.
Yes.
Okay, so Memorial Day, Labor Day, is that every day? Every year?
Every year, yes, ma'am.
No cutting?
Yes.
No.
No cutting and transport of ash wood.
So what about Project Trim then?
Between Memorial Day and Labor Day, that's why we've suspended.
Every year you're going to be suspending it?
Yes.
Going,
Between Memorial Day and Labor Day, we'll operate Project Trim between Labor Day and Memorial Day.
That's when the bugs are the most active, and that's when they're moving around, and so they
right,
don't
but
want it being transported.
that's kind of going into just the few months in the fall then, because you don't do Project Trim in the winter.
The first round begins with surveys and letters in February, so that with a trimming deadline in May.
Right, you're shortening up the Project Trim season. You're trimming it off. Okay, thank you.
That was a terrible joke. Any other questions? Thank you, Kelby, for being here, and staff. We appreciate it. We know that you will be back reporting to us again and again and again, and so we thank you for your leadership and providing this plan to not only the City Council but to the community. With that, I ask if there's any public input on any of the two presentations given today. Any public input? Are you sure? Come on up if you want. Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.